I feel like I should have a drink in my hand for this tag because it is appropriate, but all I have is alcohol and no mixers, and I have never been a shots girl, so all you get is me. Today I am doing the bar and the bookcase tag. I was tagged by Alex over at What Page Are You On, so I would definitely recommend checking out his video. And this tag was created by Jalen, who runs a channel of the same name, The Bar and the Bookcase. Now, I would highly recommend checking out his channel because he's actually going to tell you what these drinks are and what's in them, while I'm only familiar with like four, maybe. But I may not know much about booze, but I know a lot about books. First drink is an old fashioned, and I'm assuming because the title is old, he decided to connect it to an historical fiction recommendation. And for this one, I'm going to choose Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. But Pachinko starts in like 1906 and goes all the way to about the 1980s. And it follows the story of this family, a Korean, then Korean Japanese, then Korean American family, mainly told through the lens and perspective of the matriarch, who was in a, what I would call, abusive relationship with a much older man when she was a teenager. And we get to see the way that the ripples, the drop in the pond affects their entire lives and the lives of people who never even met this man. And this idea of Pachinko is a metaphor throughout this entire book because you have all these questions of, is this free will or is this fate? If I had made a different decision 20 years ago, would my son be alive now? You're getting to see all of these intense, monumental events like the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that were taught in a very, Western American-centric way through the lens of this family just trying to survive. And it's not only about them trying to survive in these intense political or social upheaval times, but also finding love and finding forgiveness and trying to raise children with a sense of autonomy and self-respect and self-worth in an environment that tells them that they're less than because they're Korean. This book is absolutely beautiful, has one of my favorite opening lines of all time, which is, "History has failed us, but no matter," and I cannot recommend it highly enough. The second drink on this list is a Sidecar, and I'm supposed to recommend a book that has a great supporting character. I'm going to cheat a little bit and pick a book that has like 12 great supporting characters, and that is Daughter of Fortune by Isabel Allende. Now, this story is set in the 1800s. It could fall under historical fiction, but I wanted it for this category because you have this young woman named Eliza Summers who goes across the ocean to the territories of California following the man that she fell in love with during the time of the gold rush. And she meets these amazing people like Joe Bonecrusher, who runs a traveling brothel. And she's partially raised by this indigenous medicine woman named Mama Fresia, who teaches her how to read her dreams and how to stave off illness and how to combine what I would call science and religion and connect her with her indigenous roots. There are all these amazing characters in this story. And while I do think Eliza is an interesting protagonist, I do enjoy learning about her and reading about her. It's this colorful collection of characters around her that surround her throughout her journey to the territories of California from all over the world. There are just so many interesting characters, and I feel that they really flesh out and round out the story in a way that makes it more compelling, even when I'm not super invested in what Eliza is doing at the moment. This book could be carried just by its supporting characters, and so for that alone, I would recommend reading it. The next prompt is a Manhattan, so recommend a book that is set in New York City. And while I could go with a couple options for this, I'm going to go with one of my favorites, which is Dominicana by Angie Cruz. Again, I'll try to keep this brief, as you have heard me talk about this book before, but this story is about a young Dominican girl named Ana who's married off to a much older man as a path to her citizenship, but also citizenship for her family. She struggles in this relationship in which he doesn't respect her, he abuses her, he cheats on her. She struggles in a new environment, New York City, trying to navigate it and learn English and figure out who she can trust and who she can't, while also trying to manage her romantic and sexual attraction to her husband's brother. So it's a story of self-actualization, of growing up, of taking agency and taking autonomy, but also there's this very intense love story that runs as a subplot, but does not overpower the original plot. I mean, it's such a beautifully vivid book, so I would highly recommend Dominicana by Angie Cruz if you are looking for a story set in Manhattan, or set in New York in general, but Manhattan. Next, we have a Bloody Mary, and the prompt is a book that messed you up. This book is also set in New York, and that is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. Now, I think messed you up can be in a good way and in a bad way, and this book was a little bit of both. I read this book in a time where my mental health was not great, and so I don't even want to say it was enjoyable, but also it's a fantastic book. It was an experience reading the story of an unnamed, spoiled rich girl who decides to spend as much of a year as possible unconscious, and she finds a super shady psychiatrist. She's combining medication, she's working with people who want to take advantage of her in their own ways, and she is just trying to detach and remove herself from the world for as long as possible as a way to heal herself of this bone deep exhaustion, of this trauma, of this mental illness that she clearly has. The book is so strange. I don't know how to describe it without you just reading it, which I know really isn't fair, but if you are interested in books where there's an unlikable protagonist, an unreliable narrator, that's, I guess, kind of a commentary on, in many ways, on femininity and beauty and power and fulfillment and the lack thereof in this modern world. And the ending is something that stays with you, because I don't think it's a happy ending by any means, but the character, from my perspective, seems to have, I'm not going to say turned over another leaf, because that again implies positive, but has made a shift. And it's another one of those books that I want to reread now that I know where it's going, because the first time you read it, I feel like you're just hanging on for dear life. You're just sitting on the roller coaster, watching it click up that hill, feeling anxious and knowing something's coming, but you don't know what it is yet. And if that's not a definition for messing me up, then I don't know what is. After that, we have Espresso Martini, a book that kept you up all night. And the most recent one I can think of is actually Axiom's End by Lindsay Ellis. This is another book I've been meaning to reread because I loved it so much, but because I read it at a very specific time in my life, I'm curious to read it again this year and see how much it holds up. This story is set in the Bush administration and follows a kind of disaffected youth college dropout, Cora Sabino, or Cora Ortega, depending on whose last name she's using, when she ends up embroiled in this government and intergalactic issue in which she is the only person on Earth who can communicate and has a relationship with an alien life form named Ampersand. For me, the strength of this book is really not in the human characters, but rather in the alien characters, Ampersand, and the people, I say people, the creatures, the beings that he is on Earth with, their dynamics, their philosophy, their history, their science. And I think the reason it was so engaging for me is because previous to that, I had been really only reading nonfiction for school, but also nonfiction for my own personal edification. So to be able to immerse myself in this alternate history, Bush era, alien invasion story, to get to like open my mind and think about, wow, what does this creature actually look like based on the way Lindsay Ellis describes them? And why is it that this creature doesn't have a human gender as we would associate gender, but it feels so normal and comfortable to refer to him as him? And if we look at this version of the universe, this idea about intelligent life, what does that say about our meaning philosophically? Like, it's an adventure story, it's a sci-fi story, but it also has all these like heady metaphysical concepts that I really enjoyed. I had so much fun with this book. It was engaging, it was fast-paced, I felt it was well written for the genre that it was. Not implying that sci-fi is a lesser genre, but that I wasn't looking to this book for like big paragraphs of flowery prose and, long Shakespeare sonnets or Toni Morrison monologues that rip your heart out. For what it was, I had a great time and I absolutely was up all night reading it. The next prompt is a book that left you disoriented, and I think that's a fitting prompt for this drink, which is Sazerac. I have no idea what this is, no idea. And for a book that left you disoriented, I'm gonna pick Kindred by Octavia Butler, because Kindred really broke me down in a way that I am still recuperating from. And the reason I have not made a video about Kindred is that I still feel very like adrift at sea about how I would talk about it. So Kindred is set in the 1970s, in which you have this Black woman who's in an interracial relationship with a white man, is inadvertently pulled back in time to the antebellum period, to the times of slavery, to a plantation in Maryland, and has this very strong, inexplicable connection with the son of the plantation owner, who grows up to be the plantation owner himself. She also is interacting with her ancestors, one of which looks very similar to her. And as she bounces back and forth through time, sometimes alone, sometimes with her husband, as she, as a modern Black woman, I mean, set in the 70s, but modern for our standards, is navigating power and navigating deception and figuring out how she's going to compromise her values and her ethics. I say compromise because this is about survival at this point in order to just live and survive as an enslaved person, but also trying to retain the part of her that she feels that she doesn't want that pain and that horror to touch. This book left me disoriented because the relationship she has with Rufus, the slave master's son who turns into slave master himself, is so complicated and so nuanced. And if you look up reviews for this book, you will see people who absolutely hate the fact that she has any sympathy for him, or hates the fact that she, doesn't murder him the second that she gets a chance. And this book disoriented me in the sense that from my comfortable position of privilege in the modern world, I really had ideas about how I would be and how I would rebel and what I would do if I was pulled back in time. But watching Dana, the main character, experience this really kind of punched me in the gut and slapped me across the face with how naive and childish I was, because I have no idea what I would actually do. So that book absolutely left me disoriented. One of these best books I have ever read, and also another book that I stayed up all night reading. So if you want to read something that is fantastic, but also vicious and a punch in the gut and so poignant and specific when it talks about generational trauma and interracial relationships, Kindred by Octavia Estelle Butler. On a completely different note, let's go to a Long Island iced tea, recommend a book that is doing too much, bonus points if it works. And this was one of the prompts that gave me the most difficulty when I was writing my notes for this video, and then the answer burst into my head like a comet. The book I have read that I think best fits this prompt is What I Was Doing While You Were Breeding by Kristen Newman. The book is a memoir about this woman, Miss Newman. She travels around the world. She spends money on things that are not children or childcare. But my perception of her, based off this memoir, is that this woman is insufferable. Now, I have not read Eat, Pray, Love. I've only seen the movie and hated it. And I have not seen every single episode or movie version of Sex and the City, just a little bit, and I also hated it. So when I tell you that this book is like Sex and the City plus Eat, Pray, Love, but the worst parts, hopefully you get what I mean. She's traveling all over the world, but the book is really about her having sex all over the world with a bunch of different people. And before you get on me for slut shaming, my problem is not that she has sex a lot, it's that the book is more focused on sex than it is about personal discovery or autonomy or lessons learned. And yes, she has some beautiful moments in Argentina and some profound moments in New Zealand that I was like, oh, right. I could see those moments of clarity, those moments of, just the moments that were about the things that I love about traveling, even though sex is lovely. But the book is really all about that. And because it's really all about that, it was really gross and obvious where her racial preferences bled into what I would just call racism. And she seemed oblivious as she wrote these things. For example, she has this scene or this event where it was either Ambien or some type of sleep medication caused her to get on her computer while still half asleep and send out emails to a bunch of people. And some of those emails were to an Asian man where she apologizes for not finding him attractive because he's Asian. And then there's another section where she's talking about Asian men where she's like, oh yeah, I went to China, but didn't have sex with anybody there because they're all too small and hairless. And there's another time where she actually has this kind of long-term sexual and romantic relationship with a man, and she gives him a nickname, a food-based nickname based on the color of his skin. And she called him by this nickname, so clearly he was okay with it. But I was like, girl. And to be so oblivious of all of these, microaggressions, I thought was really, really gross and doing too much. And then on top of that, she is set up with a man who recently got divorced, who has 2 children already. And he's the perfect man. They fall in love and now they're married and she has stepchildren. And I was like, I'm not saying that if you don't want to get married now, that means you never want to get married. I'm not saying that if you don't want to have kids now, that means you never want to have kids. But there was absolutely no buildup, in terms of literary, artistically, in the plot of this memoir, between the changes between you being I want to travel every year and have sex with a bunch of people, and now I want to settle down and have kids and have a husband. I understand that people change, and of course you can want something later in life they didn't want earlier in life, but when you don't build in that framework in a literary text, and I, as a viewer, as an audience member, as a reader, am going through your journey, and suddenly we take a hard left into going to the circus with your stepkids, I was like, oh, what? So this book was doing way too much. So Long Island iced tea, Kristen Newman, What I Was Doing When You Were Breeding. So for the next prompt, we have a Negroni, and this is recommend a book with a love triangle. Y'all know I don't like love triangles, so it took me a while to figure out a book for this prompt, but I decided to go with The Color Purple by Alice Walker. The Color Purple tells the story of Celie, who is a young, poor Black woman growing up in the American South, and she has this very, very difficult circumstances, very challenging upbringing, but she ultimately finds a way to love herself, to view God as not a white man, but as this unifying, loving entity to be found in everything and everybody. She finds friendship, learns how to make her own money. I'm emphasizing that this book has a happy ending because it's a very difficult read, but Alice Walker, who wrote this book, is also incorporating a lot of her beliefs around womanism, and God and the universe and the sanctifying love. And it's such a powerful, powerful, beautiful book. And the love triangle in the book is actually between two women and a man. Celie is married to a man who abuses her, who is terrible to her, and who is in love with a singer and performer named Suge Avery. And he brings Suge Avery into his home because she's sick and needs to be healed. And in the course of her being healed, putting on weight, getting healthy, Celie falls in love with her, and Suge, I would argue, falls in love back. They have this romantic and emotional and sexual relationship. And there are actually moments where Celie and her husband, who she only refers to as Mr. for the majority of the book, because that's how terrible he is to her, actually have moments of commiserating with each other about how both of them feel unworthy of Suge Avery. Like they both feel like they're not beautiful enough for her, because while Suge does love them in her own way and does spend certain amounts of time dedicated to them, this whole book, she's off having her adventures and dating different guys and musicians and drug dealers and famous ball players. And it's a different type of love triangle. You know, it's not the classic, here's the YA girl protagonist and here are two men who are equally as hot and devoted and she has to pick between the two. It's a very, very different relationship. And in the end, Celie has to learn that whether or not Suge is ever going to love her back the way she wants to be loved, whether or not Suge is ever going to really be dedicated to her, she knows she loves Suge, and she knows that she's grateful for what kind of joy and clarity Suge Avery brought into her life. And so she can accept whether she comes or if she goes. So it's not the traditional love triangle I normally think of when I think of certain books or TV shows, but I really liked it because it felt more real to me, this idea that you can connect with another person and not see them as competition, but just see them as a fellow in your own suffering when you love someone who's, you know, free like the wind. So I just really, really love the story of The Color Purple overall. And I love all the conversations around love between human beings, love platonically, love sexually, and also love in a cosmic sense that you can find in Alice Walker's The Color Purple. Our next prompt is a bay breeze. Pick a book that is light and breezy. And I just have to say, this prompt made me laugh when I first heard it because I don't know what a bay breeze is. All I know is a bay breeze is the drink that Rachel McAdams and Cillian Murphy talk about in Red Eye, which is a horror movie. So now I just associate bay breezes with horror movies. So removing that from my mind, a book that's light and chill, I'm gonna pick Face Paint by Lisa Eldridge. I absolutely adore her work. I have purchased her lipsticks, which are expensive but amazing. And I've been watching her videos for years. She's a professional makeup artist who's worked with brands all over the world, done cover, editorial, done more, artistic and freelance. She has pretty much done it all, whether it's commercial or couture. And this book is not so much about a history of this is how mascara was made, but she actually breaks it up into colors and textures. So a chapter on the color red could be about rouge and, during the French days of aristocracy. It could be about paint under the eyes, during Egyptian times in Africa. Like, she goes through all these different types of makeup, the way that they were introduced into society. She talks about some of the major brands that changed the makeup game, like Revlon and MAC. And there's these very beautiful, beautiful images of classic, antique, old makeup. Some of it's from her own collection. And I love makeup. I think it's so fun and artistic. Like, I really love the process of getting to express yourself through color and texture. And I love history. It's kind of a hodgepodge, and I love that. And I just find it to be a lot of fun. Now, moving away from the light and fun, we have a dark and stormy. So pick a book that is dark, thrilling, and menacing. For this book, I'm choosing The Necklace by Matt Witten. Major content warning, because this story involves the murder and sexual assault of a child, which I did not know when I picked it up. But It is a book that has a very compelling and empathetic and really like gritty and strong character, a working class waitress, the mother of the child who was murdered, who has this story that jumps back and forth in between time, back to when her daughter first went missing and all the subsequent fallout from that, the dissolution of her marriage, the way her life crumbled, but also modern times, current times, she is driving because she has no other way to afford it, to the execution of the man convicted of her daughter's crime. And throughout all of this, there's a huge murder mystery where she starts to doubt if the man convicted of her daughter's crime is the man that actually killed her. So she's trying to work through her memories. She finds these unlikely allies and retired FBI agents and teenage girls. It's something that really kept me engaged. It's something that even at the last moment when I was pretty sure I knew who the killer was, I had no idea how she was going to catch him. It's a book where like you really want her to win because she's such a sympathetic character. My main issue with it is that I did not know what the subject matter was before I decided to read it, and that stuff was very difficult for me to read. It's not something I plan on rereading, even though it was well written. And my biggest gripe about the writing is that we learn early on about what happened to the daughter. And that fact is repeated over and over and over again in different ways with varying levels of explicit detail. And honestly, after the second or third time, I was like, we know. It doesn't serve this scene. It doesn't serve the character. You don't need to shock the audience with it again. Like, we're not learning any new details. Like, we know. And that may be a personal thing. Maybe some people are totally fine reading about that stuff ad nauseum, but definitely a dark book, definitely a menacing book. It is well written, which makes me mad because I feel like I could have given it like 4 stars if that author had made the choice to be a little more judicious with those descriptors. But it fits the prompt and it is a very, very engaging time. But I just want to like really highlight what the subject matter was because that is what I wish someone would have done for me ahead of time. And for the final prompt, we have a martini, a classic recommendation. So I decided to go with The Fire Next Time. Now, The Fire Next Time is a collection of essays, 2 essays, both written on the anniversary of the Emancipation. So they were written in 1963. And James Baldwin is a brilliant, beautiful artist who writes in a way that I could only dream of one day coming close to. He tries to encourage his nephew to learn his true history, to remember that he is an American and has stake in this country, and to not let the hate and the degradation infect him and destroy his spirit. In his second essay, which really resonated with me, especially because of my academic background, Baldwin is going through his journey into and out of the church. He's talking about Christianity's complicitness in racism and colonization and bigotry. He also talks about his interactions with the Nation of Islam, his meeting with Elijah Muhammad, and the different ways he sees Christianity and Islam both helping but also hurting in the context of the 1960s and before, the cause of the civil rights movement and the cause of Black liberation specifically. This book is short. It's like only like 110 pages, but every single line could be highlighted, underlined, tattooed across the chest. The Fire Next Time is a reference to the story of Noah and the Ark and the Flood, but through the lens of a classic spiritual. God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, the fire next time. And most of what Baldwin is saying to me is a warning. Is a warning to America, that is white America. It is a warning to the Black community. It's a warning to everyone that if this shit does not get sorted out, it's going to be the fire next time. And he is arguing something that he was actually ridiculed for at the time and probably still is now by some parties. He is arguing that the liberation of white people and Black people are connected. He's arguing this idea of radical love, not necessarily love as in a nonviolent tactic, although he did work with some nonviolent groups, but love in a cosmic sense, love in a uncomfortable, challenging sense, the love that facilitates growth, the love that tells you that you can no longer wear this mask, the love that tells you that you cannot survive without this mask and you need to learn to. That type of justice-based, righteous love. And I feel like I am oversimplifying an incredibly complex and deep work, but please, if there's one book on this list, especially a nonfiction book, that you are interested in, please let it be this one that you read, because it is a short read, but it is so powerful. And it is a classic in every single sense of the word, because fortunately or unfortunately, it is still just as powerful today as I imagine it was in 1963. So that is the bar in the bookcase tag. I definitely feel like I need a drink after all that talking. And I thank you to Jalen for creating this tag, and thank you to Alex for tagging me. I hope you have a good day. May it end with a relaxing drink if that is something that you are comfortable with. And if not, may you just relax. See ya.